Chapter 7. His Majesty sleeps in Strelsau. I put my arm round Sapt's waist and supported him out of the cellar, drawing the battered door close after me. For 10 minutes or more we sat silent in the dining room. Then old Sapt rubbed his knuckles into his eyes, gave one great gasp, and was himself again. As the clock on the mantelpiece struck 1, he stamped his foot on the floor, saying, "They've got the King." "Yes," said I. "All's well, as Black Michael's despatch said. What a moment it must have been for him when the royal salutes fired at Strelsau this morning! I wonder when he got the message." "It must have been sent in the morning," said Sapt. "They must have sent it before news of your arrival at Strelsau reached Zenda. I suppose it came from Zenda." "And he's carried it about all day!" I exclaimed. "Upon my honour, I'm not the only man who's had a trying day. What did he think, Sapt?" "What does that matter? What does he think, lad, now?" I rose to my feet. "We must get back," I said, "and rouse every soldier in Strelsau. We ought to be in pursuit of Michael before midday." Old Sapt pulled out his pipe and carefully lit it from the candle which guttered on the table. "The King may be murdered while we sit here," I urged. Sapt smoked on for a moment in silence. "That cursed old woman!" he broke out. "She must have attracted their attention somehow. I see the game. They came up to kidnap the King. And, as I say, somehow they found him. If you hadn't gone to Strelsau, you and I and Fritz had been in heaven by now." "And the King?" "Who knows where the King is now?" he asked. "Come, let's be off," said I. But he sat still, and suddenly he burst into one of his grating chuckles. "By Jove, we've shaken up Black Michael!" "Come, come!" I repeated impatiently. "And we'll shake him up a bit more," he added, a cunning smile broadening on his wrinkled, weather-beaten face, and his teeth working on the end of his grizzled moustache. "Ay, lad, we'll go back to Strelsau. The King shall be in his capital again tomorrow." "The King?" "The crowned King." "You're mad!" I cried. "If we go back and tell the trick we played, what would you give for our lives?" "Just what they're worth," said I. "And for the King's throne? Do you think that the nobles and the people will enjoy being fooled as you've fooled them? Do you think they'll love a King who was too drunk to be crowned and sent a servant to personate him? He was drugged, and I'm no servant. Mine will be Black Michael's version." He rose, came to me, and laid his hand on my shoulder. "Lad," he said, "if you play the man, you may save the King yet. Go back and keep his throne warm for him." "But the Duke knows. The villains he has employed know." "Ay, but they can't speak!" roared Sapt in grim triumph. "We've got 'em! How can they denounce you without denouncing themselves? This is not the King, because we kidnapped the King and murdered his servant. Can they say that?" The position flashed on me. Whether Michael knew me or not, he could not speak. Unless he produced the King, what could he do? And if he produced the King, where was he? For a moment I was carried away headlong, but in an instant the difficulties came strong upon me. "I must be found out," I urged. "Perhaps, but every hour's something. Above all, we must have a King in Strelsau, or the city will be Michael's in 24 hours. And what would the King's life be worth then, or his throne? Lad, you must do it." "Suppose they kill the King?" "They'll kill him if you don't." "Sapt, suppose they have killed the King?" "Then, by Heaven, you're as good an Elphberg as Black Michael, and you shall reign in Ruritania. But I don't believe they have. Nor will they kill him if you're on the throne. Will they kill him to put you in it?" It was a wild plan, wilder even and more hopeless than the trick we had already carried through. But as I listened to Sapt, I saw the strong points in our game. And then I was a young man, and I loved action, and I was offered such a hand in such a game as perhaps never man played yet. "I shall be found out?" I said. "Perhaps," said Sapt. "Come to Strelsau. We shall be caught like rats in a trap if we stay here." "Sapt," I cried, "I'll try it." "Well played," said he. "I hope they've left us the horses. I'll go and see." "We must bury that poor fellow," said I. "No time," said Sapt. "I'll do it." "Hang you!" he grinned. "I make you a king, and well, do it. Go and fetch him while I look to the horses. He can't lie very deep, but I doubt if he'll care about that. Poor little Joseph! He was an honest bit of a man." He went out, and I went into the cellar. I raised poor Joseph in my arms, and bore him into the passage, and thence towards the door of the house. Just inside I laid him down, remembering that I must find spades for our task. At this instant Sapt came up. "The horses are all right. There's the own brother to the one that brought you here, but you may save yourself that job." "I'll not go before he's buried." "Yes, you will." "Not I, Colonel Sapt, not for all Ruritania." "You fool!" said he. "Come here." He drew me to the door. The moon was sinking, but about 300 yards away, coming along the road from Zenda, I made out a party of men. There were 7 or 8 of them. 4 were on horseback, and the rest were walking, and I saw that they carried long implements, which I guessed to be spades and mattocks, on their shoulders. "They'll save you the trouble," said Sapt. "Come along." He was right. The approaching party must, beyond doubt, be Duke Michael's men, come to remove the traces of their evil work. I hesitated no longer, but an irresistible desire seized me. Pointing to the corpse of poor little Joseph, I said to Sapt: "Colonel, we ought to strike a blow for him." "You'd like to give him some company, eh? But it's too risky work, your Majesty." "I must have a slap at 'em," said I. Sapt wavered. "Well," said he, "it's not business, you know. But you've been a good boy, and if we come to grief, why, hang me, it'll save us a lot of thinking. I'll show you how to touch them." He cautiously closed the open chink of the door. Then we retreated through the house and made our way to the back entrance. Here our horses were standing. A carriage drive swept all round the lodge. "Revolver ready?" asked Sapt. "No, steel for me," said I. "Gad, you're thirsty tonight," chuckled Sapt. "So be it." We mounted, drawing our swords, and waited silently for a minute or two. Then we heard the tramp of men on the drive on the other side of the house. They came to a stand, and one cried: "Now then, fetch him out." "Now," whispered Sapt. Driving the spurs into our horses, we rushed at a gallop round the house, and in a moment we were among the ruffians. Sapt told me afterwards that he killed a man, and I believe him, but I saw no more of him. With a cut I split the head of a fellow on a brown horse, and he fell to the ground. Then I found myself opposite a big man, and I was half conscious of another to my right. It was too warm to stay, and with a simultaneous action I drove my spurs into my horse again, and my sword full into the big man's breast. His bullet whizzed past my ear. I could almost swear it touched it. I wrenched at the sword, but it would not come, and I dropped it and galloped after Sapt, whom I now saw about 20 yards ahead. I waved my hand in farewell, and dropped it a second later with a yell, for a bullet had grazed my finger, and I felt the blood. Old Sapt turned round in the saddle. Someone fired again, but they had no rifles, and we were out of range. Sapt fell to laughing. "That's 1 to me and 2 to you, with decent luck," said he. "Little Joseph will have company." "Ay, there'll be a partie carrée," said I. My blood was up, and I rejoiced to have killed them. "Well, a pleasant night's work to the rest," said he. "I wonder if they noticed you?" "The big fellow did. As I struck him, I heard him cry 'The King!'" "Good, good! Oh, we'll give Black Michael some work before we're done." Pausing an instant, we made a bandage for my wounded finger, which was bleeding freely and ached severely, the bone being much bruised. Then we rode on, asking of our good horses all that was in them. The excitement of the fight and of our great resolve died away, and we rode in gloomy silence. Day broke clear and cold. We found a farmer just up, and made him give us sustenance for ourselves and our horses. I, feigning a toothache, muffled my face closely. Then ahead again till Strelsau lay before us. It was 8 o'clock, or nearing 9, and the gates were all open, as they always were, save when the Duke's caprice or intrigue shut them. We rode in by the same way as we had come out the evening before, all four of us, the men and the horses, wearied and jaded. The streets were even quieter than when we had gone. Everyone was sleeping off last night's revelry, and we met hardly a soul till we reached the little gate of the palace. There Sapt's old groom was waiting for us. "Is all well, sir?" he asked. "All's well," said Sapt, and the man, coming to me, took my hand to kiss. "The King's hurt!" he cried. "It's nothing," said I, as I dismounted. I caught my finger in the door. "Remember, silence!" said Sapt. "Ah, but my good Freyler, I don't need to tell you that." The old fellow shrugged his shoulders. "All young men like to ride abroad now and again. Why not the King?" said he, and Sapt's laugh left his opinion of my motives undisturbed. "You should always trust a man," observed Sapt, fitting the key in the lock, "just as far as you must." We went in and reached the dressing room. Flinging open the door, we saw Fritz von Tarlenheim stretched, fully dressed, on the sofa. He seemed to have been sleeping, but our entry woke him. He leapt to his feet, gave one glance at me, and with a joyful cry threw himself on his knees before me. "Thank God, sire! Thank God you're safe!" he cried, stretching his hand out to catch hold of mine. I confess that I was moved. This King, whatever his faults, made people love him. For a moment I could not bear to speak or break the poor fellow's illusion, but tough old Sapt had no such feeling. He slapped his hand on his thigh delightedly. "Bravo, lad!" cried he. "We shall do." Fritz looked up in bewilderment. I held out my hand. "You're wounded, sire!" he exclaimed. "It's only a scratch," said I, "but " I paused. He rose to his feet with a bewildered air. Holding my hand, he looked me up and down and up. Then suddenly he dropped my hand and reeled back. "Where's the King? Where's the King?" he cried. "Hush, you fool!" hissed Sapt. "Not so loud. Here's the King." A knock sounded on the door. Sapt seized me by the hand. "Here, quick, to the bedroom. Off with your cap and boots. Get into bed. Cover everything up." I did as I was bid. A moment later Sapt looked in, nodded, grinned, and introduced an extremely smart and deferential young gentleman, who came up to my bedside, bowing again and again, and informed me that he was of the household of the Princess Flavia, and that her Royal Highness had sent him especially to inquire how the King's health was, after the fatigues which his Majesty had undergone yesterday. "My best thanks, sir, to my cousin," said I, "and tell her Royal Highness that I was never better in my life." "The King," added old Sapt, who I began to find loved a good lie for its own sake, "has slept without a break all night." The young gentleman he reminded me of Osric in Hamlet bowed himself out again. The farce was over, and Fritz von Tarlenheim's pale face recalled us to reality, though, in faith, the farce had to be reality for us now. "Is the King dead?" he whispered. "Please God, no," said I. "But he's in the hands of Black Michael." Chapter 8. A fair cousin and a dark brother. A real king's life is perhaps a hard one, but a pretend king's is, I warrant, much harder. On the next day Sapt instructed me in my duties, what I ought to do and what I ought to know, for 3 hours. Then I snatched some breakfast, with Sapt still opposite me, telling me that the King always took white wine in the morning, and was known to detest all highly seasoned dishes. Then came the Chancellor for another 3 hours, and to him I had to explain that the hurt to my finger (we turned that bullet to happy account) prevented me from writing, whence arose great to do, hunting of precedents and so forth, ending in my making my mark, and the Chancellor attesting it with a superfluity of solemn oaths. Then the French ambassador was introduced to present his credentials, but here my ignorance was of no importance, as the King would have been equally raw to the business. We worked through the whole corps diplomatique in the next few days, a demise of the Crown necessitating all this bother. Then at last I was left alone. I called my new servant we had chosen to succeed poor Josef, a young man who had never known the King. had a brandy and soda brought to me, and observed to Sapt that I trusted I might now have a rest. Fritz von Tarlenheim was standing by. "By heaven!" he cried, "we waste time. Aren't we going to throw Black Michael by the heels?" "Gently, my son, gently," said Sapt, knitting his brows. "It would be a pleasure, but it might cost us dear. Would Michael fall and leave the King alive? And," I suggested, "while the King is here in Strelsau on his throne, what grievance has he against his dear brother Michael?" "Are we to do nothing, then?" "We are to do nothing stupid," growled Sapt. "In fact, Fritz," said I am reminded of a situation in one of our English plays, The Critic. Have you heard of it? Or, if you like, of two men, each covering the other with a revolver. For I can't expose Michael without exposing myself." "And the King," put in Sapt. "And hang me if Michael won't expose himself if he tries to expose me." "It's very pretty," said old Sapt. "If I'm found out," I pursued, "I will make a clean breast of it and fight it out with the duke. But at present I'm waiting for a move from him." "He'll kill the King," said Fritz. "Not he," said Sapt. "Half of the six are in Strelsau," said Fritz. "Only half? You're sure?" asked Sapt eagerly. "Yes, only half." "Then the King's alive, for the other three are guarding him," cried Sapt. "Yes, you're right!" exclaimed Fritz, his face brightening. "If the King were dead and buried, they'd all be here with Michael. You know Michael's back, Colonel?" "I know, curse him!" "Gentlemen, gentlemen," said I, "who are the six?" "I think you'll make their acquaintance soon," said Sapt. "They are six gentlemen whom Michael maintains in his household. They belong to him, body and soul. There are three Ruritanians, then there's a Frenchman, a Belgian, and one of your countrymen." "They'd all cut a throat if Michael told them," said Fritz. "Perhaps they'll cut mine," I suggested. "Nothing more likely," agreed Sapt. "Who are they, Fritz?" "Degote, Bersonin, and a Deschardes." "The foreigners. It's as plain as a pikestaff. He's brought them, and left the Ruritanians with the King. That's because he wants to commit the Ruritanians as deep as he can." "They were none of them among our friends at the lodge, then?" I asked. "I wish they had been," said Sapt wistfully. "They had been, not six, but four by now." I had already developed one attribute of royalty, a feeling that I need not reveal all my mind or my secret designs, even to my intimate friends. I had fully resolved on my course of action. I meant to make myself as popular as I could, and at the same time to show no disfavour to Michael. By these means I hoped to allay the hostility of his adherents, and make it appear, if an open conflict came about, that he was ungrateful and not oppressed. Yet an open conflict was not what I hoped for. The King's interest demanded secrecy, and while secrecy lasted, I had a fine game to play in Strelsau. Michael should not grow stronger for delay. I ordered my horse, and, attended by Fritz von Tarlenheim, rode in the grand new avenue of the Royal Park, returning all the salutes which I received with punctilious politeness. Then I rode through a few of the streets, stopped, and bought flowers of a pretty girl, paying her with a piece of gold. And then, having attracted the desired amount of attention, for I had a trail of 500 people after me, I rode to the residence of the Princess Flavia, and asked if she would receive me. This step created much interest, and was met with shouts of approval. The princess was very popular, and the Chancellor himself had not scrupled to hint to me that the more I pressed my suit, and the more rapidly I brought it to a prosperous conclusion, the stronger I should be in the affection of my subjects. The Chancellor, of course, did not understand the difficulties which lay in the way of following his loyal and excellent advice. However, I thought I could do no harm by calling, and in this view Fritz supported me with a cordiality that surprised me, until he confessed that he also had his motives for liking a visit to the princess's house, which motive was no other than a great desire to see the princess's lady-in-waiting and bosom friend, the Countess Helga von Strofsen. Etiquette seconded Fritz's hopes. While I was ushered into the princess's room, he remained with the countess in the antechamber. In spite of the people and servants who were hanging about, I doubt not that they managed a tête-à-tête. But I had no leisure to think of them, for I was playing the most delicate move in all my difficult game. I had to keep the princess devoted to me, and yet indifferent to me. I had to show affection for her, and not feel it. I had to make love for another, and that to a girl who, princess or no princess, was the most beautiful I had ever seen. Well, I braced myself to the task, made no easier by the charming embarrassment with which I was received. How I succeeded in carrying out my programme will appear hereafter. "You are gaining golden laurels," she said. "You are like the prince in Shakespeare, who was transformed by becoming king. But I'm forgetting you are king, sire. I ask you to speak nothing but what your heart tells you, and to call me nothing but my name." She looked at me for a moment. "Then I'm glad and proud, Rudolf," said she. "Why, as I told you, your very face is changed." I acknowledged the compliment, but I disliked the topic, so I said: "My brother is back, I hear. He made an excursion, didn't he?" "Yes, he's here," she said, frowning a little. "He can't stay long from Strelsau, it seems," I observed, smiling. "Well, we are all glad to see him. The nearer he is, the better." The princess glanced at me with a gleam of amusement in her eyes. "Why, cousin, is it that you can see better what he's doing?" "Perhaps," said I. "And why are you glad?" "I didn't say I was glad," she answered. "Some people say so for you." "There are many insolent people," she said, with delightful haughtiness. "Possibly you mean that I am one." "Your Majesty could not be," she said, curtseying in feigned deference, but adding mischievously after a pause, "unless, that is..." "Well, unless what?" "Unless you tell me that I mind a snap of my fingers where the Duke of Strelsau is. Really, I wished that I had been the King." "You don't care where cousin Michael..." "Ah, cousin Michael. I call him the Duke of Strelsau." "You call him Michael when you meet him?" "Yes, by the orders of your father." "I see. And now by mine?" "If those are your orders." "Oh, decidedly. We must all be pleasant to our dear Michael." "You order me to receive his friends too, I suppose?" "The Six?" "You call them that too?" "To be in the fashion, I do. But I order you to receive no one unless you like." "Except yourself?" "I pray for myself. I could not order." As I spoke, there came a cheer from the street. The princess ran to the window. "It is he!" she cried. "It is the Duke of Strelsau!" I smiled, but said nothing. She returned to her seat. For a few moments we sat in silence. The noise outside subsided, but I heard the tread of feet in the ante room. I began to talk on general subjects. This went on for some minutes. I wondered what had become of Michael, but it did not seem to be for me to interfere. All at once, to my great surprise, Flavia, clasping her hands, asked me in an agitated voice: "Are you wise to make him so angry?" "What? Who? How am I making him angry?" "Why, by keeping him waiting." "My dear cousin, I don't want to keep him." "Well, then, is he to come in?" "Of course, if you wish it." She looked at me curiously. "How funny you are!" she said. "Of course no one could be announced while I was with you." Here was a charming attribute of royalty. "An excellent etiquette!" I cried. "But I had clean forgotten it. And if I were alone with someone else, couldn't you be announced?" "You know as well as I do I could be, because I am of the blood." And she still looked puzzled. "I never could remember all these silly rules," said I, rather feebly, as I inwardly cursed Fritz for not posting me up. "But I'll repair my fault." I jumped up, flung open the door, and advanced into the ante room. Michael was sitting at a table, a heavy frown on his face. Everyone else was standing, save that impudent young dog Fritz, who was lounging easily in an armchair and flirting with the Countess Helga. He leapt up as I entered, with a deferential alacrity that lent point to his former nonchalance. I had no difficulty in understanding that the Duke might not like young Fritz. I held out my hand. Michael took it, and I embraced him. Then I drew him with me into the inner room. "Brother," I said, "if I had known you were here, you should not have waited a moment before I asked the princess to permit me to bring you to her." He thanked me, but coldly. The man had many qualities, but he could not hide his feelings. A mere stranger could have seen that he hated me, and hated worse to see me with the Princess Flavia. Yet I am persuaded that he tried to conceal both feelings, and further, that he tried to persuade me that he believed I was verily the King. I did not know, of course, but unless the King were an impostor, at once cleverer and more audacious than I, and I began to think something of myself in that role, Michael could not believe that. And if he didn't, how he must have loathed paying me deference and hearing my Michael and my Flavia. "Your hand is hurt, sire," he observed with concern. Yes, I was playing a game with a mongrel dog. I meant to stir him. And you know, brother, such have uncertain tempers. He smiled sourly, and his dark eyes rested on me for a moment. "But is there no danger from the bite?" cried Flavia anxiously. "None from this," said I. "If I gave him a chance to bite deeper, it would be different, cousin." "But surely he has been destroyed?" said she. "Not yet. We're waiting to see if his bite is harmful." "And if it is?" asked Michael, with his sour smile. "He'll be knocked on the head, brother," said I. "You won't play with him any more?" urged Flavia. "Perhaps I shall." "He might bite again." "Doubtless he'll try," said I, smiling. Then, fearing Michael would say something which I must appear to resent, for, though I might show him my hate, I must seem to be full of favour, I began to compliment him on the magnificent condition of his regiment, and of their loyal greeting to me on the day of my coronation. Thence I passed to a rapturous description of the hunting lodge which he had lent me. But he rose suddenly to his feet. His temper was failing him, and with an excuse he said farewell. However, as he reached the door, he stopped, saying: "Three friends of mine are very anxious to have the honour of being presented to you, sire. They are here in the antechamber." I joined them directly, passing my arm through his. The look on his face was honey to me. We entered the antechamber in fraternal fashion. Michael beckoned, and three men came forward. "These gentlemen," said Michael, with a stately courtesy which, to do him justice, he could assume with perfect grace and ease, "are the loyalest and most devoted of your Majesty's servants, and are my very faithful and attached friends." "On the last ground as much as the first," said I. "I am very pleased to see them." They came one by one and kissed my hand. De Gautet, a tall, lean fellow with hair standing straight up and waxed moustache; Bersonin, the Belgian, a portly man of middle height with a bald head, though he was not far past 30; and last the Englishman, Detchard, a narrow-faced fellow with close-cut fair hair and a bronzed complexion. He was a finely made man, broad in the shoulders and slender in the hips. A good fighter, but a crooked customer, I put him down for. I spoke to him in English, with a slight foreign accent, and I swear the fellow smiled, though he hid the smile in an instant. So Mr. Detchard is in on the secret, thought I. Having got rid of my dear brother and his friends, I returned to make my adieu to my cousin. She was standing at the door. I bade her farewell, taking her hand in mine. "Rudolf," she said, very low, "be careful, won't you?" "Of what?" "You know, I can't say, but think what your life is to..." "Well, to Ruritania." Was I right to play the part, or wrong to play the part? I know not. Evil lay both ways, and I dared not tell her the truth. "Only to Ruritania?" I asked softly. A sudden flush spread over her incomparable face. "To your friends too?" she said. "Friends?" "And to your cousin," she whispered, "and loving servant." I could not speak. I kissed her hand and went out, cursing myself. Outside, I found Master Fritz, quite reckless of the footman, playing at cat's cradle with the Countess Helga. "Hang it!" said he, "we can't always be plotting. Love claims his share." "I'm inclined to think he does," said I. And Fritz, who had been by my side, dropped respectfully behind.